But first, Kosloski's comments reminded us of two things right off the bat. Number one, we have a special guest coming on All Things Unexplained in October by the name of Dr. Stephen Bruehl. Dr. Bruehl co-authored a recent paper with Beatrice Villarreal that went viral about transients on observatory plates. But Bruehl has done his own UAP studies as well, including a paper with Sarah Little and Robert Powell titled Cluster Analysis of Features Associated with Unidentified Anomalous Phenomenon, described in 216 select reports from 1947 to 2016. And in that paper, Bruehl, Little, and Powell identify several clusters of UAP, and one of those clusters they dubbed Cluster 4, and this specifically was triangular UAP. And it's these triangular UAP that sound a lot like Kozlowski's triangular UAP. Let's examine exactly what Cluster 4 is in Bruehl, Powell, and Little's recent preprint. They describe Cluster 4 as such. The most notable feature regarding the primary clustering variables for Cluster 4 was shape, with these UAP reported most frequently to be roughly triangular in shape. For example, triangle, delta, boomerang, chevron. All objects in this cluster displayed an ability to hover. None were associated with EM effects or sound, and they were intermediate in size relative to other clusters. In terms of secondary characteristics, objects in Cluster 4 tended to be observed at low altitudes and relatively near the observer. It is notable that nearly all sightings of UAP assigned to Cluster 4 took place at night, 92%, and black was the single most common object color reported, 32%. In more than 2/3 of these cases, the UAP displayed distinct lights, a higher percentage than any other cluster type. Objects in Cluster 4 were more likely than all other identified UAP types to exhibit estimated speeds greater than Mach 1 and instantaneous acceleration or deceleration. More than 40% displayed odd movement patterns and approached the observer. In terms of hovering, the paper notes, consistent with the manual analysis conducted by Powell, reports of objects roughly triangular in shape began to appear significantly more recently than reports of objects in nearly all other clusters. That prior work had also noted the association between triangular-shaped objects and distinct red and white lighting patterns. Objects assigned statistically to the cluster comprising the highest percentage of roughly triangular objects in the current work were significantly more likely than objects in all other clusters, except Cluster 7, to exhibit distinct lighting patterns, and these were most often reported to be red and white in color. Results of Powell suggested that while hovering could be observed in objects of any shape, this feature was most common in triangular objects. Results of our cluster analysis differ somewhat from this conclusion. While objects in the cluster comprising the highest percentage of truly triangular UAP were in fact all noted to display hovering, we also identified a cluster consisting entirely of disk or spherical objects that also all exhibited hovering. Thus, a statistical approach to identifying UAP types based on multiple features suggests that hovering may be linked to both distinct disk, spherical, and triangular shapes. In terms of EM, that is electromagnetic effects, Powell concluded that triangle-shaped UAP do not exhibit EM effects. Our findings that the cluster comprising the highest percentage of triangular-shaped UAP, also known as Cluster 4, did not exhibit EM effects would be consistent with this prior work. However, our results suggested that UAP exhibiting EM effects reflected a distinct group of UAP reports rather than simply being a characteristic associated with a single shape. Nonetheless, As in this prior work, examination of object shapes in cluster 6 suggested that disk or spheres were the most common shape associated with EM effects. As noted in the results, 97% of UAP exhibiting EM effects were reported to be within 2,000 feet or less from the observer. Although possible bias due to selection criteria for inclusion in this study must be considered, these findings may suggest an approximate upper limit, at least in order of magnitude, for the distance over which EM effects can be exerted. Their preprint also said in terms of light colors, in 10 of 26 of nighttime sightings of roughly triangular UAP, that's cluster 4, the objects displayed both red and white lights simultaneously. Beyond red and white, blue or purple was the most common color of distinct lights. And remember, Kosloski said that law enforcement encountered these triangular UAP, which emitted red and blue lights. And then finally, and this is really interesting, when examined at the level of individual UAP reports, 32.9% of the objects assigned to clusters 1 and 4 hovered silently, but also displayed either instant acceleration or deceleration or speeds greater than Mach 1. The extreme kinematic range reported in many UAP reports assigned to these clusters in the total absence of any sound suggests that these flight characteristics are not likely achieved via traditional aircraft propulsion methods. Wow. I want to conclude this episode with a statement from the preprint by Bruehl, Little, and Powell on triangle UAP. They said, the extreme kinematic range reported in many UAP reports assigned to these clusters in the total absence of any sound suggests that these flight characteristics are not likely achieved via traditional aircraft propulsion methods. If we're not dealing with human propulsion methods, then just what are we dealing with?